Jack Thornton stood before the large window of his office, staring out at the glittering lights of the city below. Everything looked dazzling, yet to him, everything felt dim and distant. The beautiful view of New York, the city where he had built his financial empire, now felt meaningless. He no longer found joy in his work, or even in the social meetings he had with partners and investors. The people around him were mere shadows, unable to understand the pain he had been carrying for so long. 2 years ago, he lost his wife and child in a tragic car accident. That incident had changed his life forever. The grief and emptiness still lingered, despite his many accomplishments. He couldn't shake the memories of them, his family, and every night. When he returned to his empty mansion, the loneliness crept in stronger than ever. He turned back to his desk, where the usual financial reports awaited him. The numbers couldn't replace love, but work was the only thing that kept him from spiraling into despair. His hand brushed over his pen, and he remembered all the deals he had signed. But now, those deals felt like lifeless paperwork. Love and happiness had left him long ago. The maid was a part of his life in this massive mansion. Lucy Evans, a young, simple girl, dedicated to her work. She never imagined her life would change by working for Jack Thornton. Despite being just a maid in Jack's luxurious home, Lucy always carried herself with optimism and love for her work. She never thought she would have a chance to interact with this wealthy man, but she couldn't help but notice the moments when he would sit alone in his office, his gaze lost, as though he didn't belong to this world anymore. One day, Jack found himself in a situation at work where he couldn't make an important call, and Lucy, by chance, became the only person who could help him. One morning, Jack was struggling with some important phone calls. He had a massive financial issue to deal with, but his phone suddenly stopped working. He cursed under his breath. This could cost him a major deal. Frustrated, Jack pushed the door to his office open. "I need help, now," Jack said, his voice filled with tension. Lucy happened to walk by and heard him. She quickly approached him. "Mr. Thornton, is there something I can do?" Jack turned around, surprised that she wasn't intimidated by him, a man who everyone in his company revered. He hesitated, but then spoke, his voice dry. "My phone's broken. I need to make a call to my partner in Tokyo. Could you help me with that?" Lucy nodded, not hesitating for a moment. "Of course, Mr. Thornton, I'll take care of it." That moment was the first time Jack realized that, out of everyone around him, only Lucy was the one who didn't look at him with awe or fear. She didn't see him as a billionaire, as the successful business tycoon. She just saw him as a person who needed help. That simple act of assistance made Jack feel a connection he hadn't felt in a long time. Weeks passed, and Jack started to notice her presence more often. Lucy wasn't just doing her job. She was quietly creating a small space of warmth in his vast, cold mansion. She wasn't overly familiar, and she didn't try to get too close. But her kind gestures and the way she worked with care made him feel seen, not just as a billionaire, but as a man. One day, after a long day at work, Jack came back to the mansion feeling the usual weight of exhaustion. He entered the living room, which was elegant but still felt empty. He didn't have any particular plans, but when his eyes landed on Lucy, who was cleaning the kitchen, an odd feeling stirred within him, a desire to talk, to connect. He had never felt that way with anyone. Lucy turned to see him. "Mr. Thornton, dinner is ready. If you'd like, I can set it up now," she said, with a calm, pleasant tone. Jack stood still for a moment and then nodded. "Thank you, Lucy. I'd like to join you for dinner if you don't mind. Lucy smiled gently, her warmth radiating. Of course, Mr. Thornton. That dinner felt different. They sat across from each other. No business talk, no pressure, just a simple meal shared between two people. There was no talk about contracts, no negotiations, just an easy, quiet evening. Jack was surprised by how he didn't feel the need to hide his feelings for the first time in years. He could talk openly about the pain of losing his family, about how he had buried himself in work to avoid confronting his grief. Lucy listened without judgment, asking gentle questions and offering her own stories. Simple yet comforting. Life can be really hard sometimes, don't you think? Lucy said as Jack shared the loss of his family. But when I think about it, I realize that not everything that's lost is gone forever. Sometimes we have to learn to live with the past, not forget it, but grow from it. Jack was taken aback by her wisdom. She wasn't just a maid. She was someone with inner strength he hadn't expected to find. Her words, though simple, made him feel at peace, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone. Her presence, though quiet, had a calming effect on him that he couldn't explain. Later that evening, Jack and Lucy went out into the garden where Jack usually sat to relax. The space was open, with trees and soft lighting around the pathway. They sat on the bench near the pond, and they continued talking. Jack hadn't expected a maid to bring him this kind of peace. She had a quiet strength and calmness that he desperately needed in his life. She didn't do anything extraordinary, but just being around her made him feel connected to something more real. Lucy, Jack spoke after a long silence. Thank you for being here. I don't know what to say, but I feel different since you've started working here. Lucy looked at him, her expression soft. You don't need to thank me, Mr. Thornton. I just do what I think is right. Sometimes, all it takes is being there for someone when they need it. The strange connection between Jack and Lucy wasn't just about comforted, was something deeper. Jack couldn't explain why, but he began to realize that maybe life wasn't just about work and success. Maybe he needed someone like Lucy in his life to find real meaning again. As the night grew darker, Lucy went back inside to finish cleaning, but before she went in, she looked at Jack one more time. I'll always be here, Mr. Thornton, she said softly. Whenever you need me, I'll help. The days following that quiet dinner were filled with an odd sense of calm that Jack hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since the accident that claimed his family, he felt like he was breathing again. Lucy's presence was like a gentle balm on his raw emotions, her soft-spoken words and quiet support breaking through his icy exterior little by little. Despite the walls he had built around himself, Jack found himself seeking out her company more often, though he couldn't quite explain why. A few days later, Jack found himself sitting in his office again, a stack of reports in front of him. But today, it wasn't the work that held his attention. It was the memory of their dinner, of how different it felt to talk to someone who didn't see him as just the CEO or the billionaire. Lucy had made him feel like a person, not a title. He was startled from his thoughts when a knock at the door interrupted his reverie. He turned to see Lucy standing at the doorway, holding a tray of coffee. A simple yet thoughtful gesture. Mr. Thornton. I thought you might like a cup of coffee, she said, her voice as warm and unassuming as always. Jack didn't answer immediately. He simply looked at her, noticing for the first time how natural she seemed in this space, how much more comfortable she had made the mansion feel since she started working here. It wasn't just the coffee. It was the way she carried herself, the way she made everything feel less cold and more ... human. "Thank you, Lucy," he said after a pause, his voice quieter than usual. "You're very thoughtful." Lucy smiled softly as she placed the tray on his desk. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Thornton." But Jack knew it was more than that. She wasn't just doing her job, she was bringing a sense of normalcy into his life that he hadn't realized he needed. The following week, Jack found himself asking Lucy for help more often than he ever had. It started with small things, asking her to take messages for him when he couldn't answer his phone, or having her arrange meetings when he was swamped with work. But it wasn't just the practical matters that drew him to her. It was her calm demeanor, her ability to listen without interrupting, her quiet support that made the most difference. One afternoon, Jack found himself walking through the mansion, heading for his office, when he noticed Lucy standing by the window, looking out at the garden. The light from the setting sun bathed the room in a soft, golden hue, and for a moment, Jack simply watched her. There was something about the way she stood, there quiet, lost in thought, that made him want to reach out, to ask if she was okay. "Lucy," he said, his voice breaking the silence. She turned toward him, offering a gentle smile. "Yes, Mr. Thornton." "Are you happy here?" Jack asked before he could stop himself. It was an unexpected question, one that seemed too personal for the relationship they had, but it was something that had been on his mind for a while. Lucy hesitated, and for a moment Jack wondered if he had overstepped. But then she spoke, her voice soft and honest. "I am," she said, her gaze steady. "I may not have much, but I am content with what I have. I believe that happiness doesn't come from what we own, but from what we choose to value." Jack was taken aback by her words. He had spent so much of his life chasing wealth, success, and status, believing those things would bring him happiness. But in that moment, he realized that Lucy was right. She didn't have the luxuries that he did, yet she carried a sense of peace that he envied. Later that evening, Jack found himself sitting alone in his office, staring at the mountain of paperwork in front of him. He could feel the weight of the day pressing down on him. He was used to the long hours, the endless meetings, the decisions that never seemed to stop. But for some reason, it all felt heavier tonight. As he leaned back in his chair, he realized that despite all the success he had built, something was missing. He had everything except for peace of mind without thinking. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for the one person who had made him feel something real, something beyond his wealth and business. After a moment of hesitation, he hung up and sighed. Maybe it wasn't the right time. Just as he was about to put the phone down, there was a soft knock at the door. "Mr. Thornton." It was Lucy again, standing in the doorway. "I've finished cleaning the kitchen. I was wondering if you'd like some tea before bed." Jack looked at her, the tiredness in his eyes giving way to something else, something deeper. He realized that she wasn't just here to work. She had become a part of his life, even if he didn't fully understand why. "Tea sounds good," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Thank you, Lucy." Over the next few days, Jack found himself talking to Lucy more than he had ever talked to anyone in years. It wasn't just about work anymore. She asked him about his childhood, his parents, things he hadn't thought about in ages. He found himself sharing stories, telling her about the things that had shaped him, about the things he had lost. Lucy never judged him. She never tried to fix him. She just listened. And that was enough. She gave him something he hadn't realized he needed: someone to share the weight of his past with. Someone who wouldn't run away when things got tough. One evening, as they sat in the garden again, Jack looked at her and finally asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Why do you stay, Lucy?" His voice was filled with curiosity and a hint of something more. "You could have any job you wanted. You don't have to stay here with me." Lucy smiled, her eyes warm. "Because I believe that even in places that seem broken, there's room for healing. And maybe, just maybe, I'm here to help." Jack didn't respond immediately, but as he sat there, the pieces of his life, his work, his grief, his loneliness started to fall into place. Maybe it was true that healing didn't just come from success or money. Maybe it came from the connections we made, from the people who offered us understanding when we didn't even realize we needed it. And for the first time in a long while, Jack felt like maybe, just maybe, he was starting to heal. The days continued to pass with Jack feeling a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. He had begun to open up more, letting Lucy into parts of his life that he had long kept hidden. They spent evenings talking, sometimes about work, but often about their pasts, about the things that had shaped them into who they were today. For Jack, each conversation with Lucy felt like peeling back another layer of the walls he had built around himself. And every time, it became harder to deny the feelings he was starting to develop for her. The way she cared for him without expecting anything in return. The way she listened. The way she made him feel like he wasn't just a symbol of success, but a person worthy of love and understanding. But still, there were days when the shadows of his past crept in, when the weight of his memories threatened to drag him back into the darkness. Today was one of those days. It was late afternoon, and Jack was sitting in his study, staring at a series of financial reports in front of him. His eyes were unfocused, the numbers blurring together. He had a major business decision to make, but his mind kept drifting back to memories he had long tried to forget. He had spent years building his empire, but at what cost? The loss of his family still haunted him, and no amount of success seemed to fill the void. A soft knock at the door broke his thoughts. "Mr. Thornton." It was Lucy, standing in the doorway with a tray of tea, her face warm and gentle. "I thought you might like some tea. You've been working for hours." Jack nodded, grateful for the distraction. "Thank you, Lucy. You always know exactly what I need." She smiled and walked over to the desk, setting the tray down in front of him. "I don't know about that, but I try," she said, her voice light. "It's important to take breaks, Mr. Thornton. You work too hard." He chuckled softly, trying to push away the weight he felt pressing on his chest. "It's just the way things are. The work never stops, and I don't know how to do anything else." Lucy sat down across from him, her eyes thoughtful. "But surely you know that life isn't just about work, right? There has to be more than that." Her words hit him in a way that was unexpected. She was right. He had built everything he had around his work, around success. But in doing so, he had lost sight of the things that truly mattered: love, connection, and healing. "I used to think I had everything," Jack admitted, his voice quieter now. "But now, all I see are the things I've lost. My family, my wife, my child. They were the ones who made life worth living. And now I'm just ... here." Lucy's gaze softened, and she reached across the table, placing her hand gently over his. "Jack, you don't have to carry that burden alone. You don't have to keep hiding from your past. It's okay to feel the pain. It's part of who you are. He looked up at her, surprised by the depth of understanding in her eyes. She wasn't just saying the right words, she actually understood. For a brief moment, it felt like the walls he had spent years building around himself were crumbling. Maybe, just maybe, he could start letting go. The next evening, Jack found himself at a crossroads. It had been a long time since he had thought about his late wife, Sophia, and their son, Noah. He avoided the memories as much as possible, afraid of the rawness of the emotions they would bring. But tonight, he couldn't ignore it. The weight of everything he had lost seemed unbearable, and he found himself standing at the edge of his past, uncertain whether he was ready to confront it. As if on impulse, he walked to the large wooden chest at the corner of the room, the one he had kept locked for years. Inside were mementos of his past pictures of Sophia, Noah, their wedding day, the first steps of their son. The chest was a painful reminder of what he had lost, but he knew, deep down, that it was time to face it. Jack opened the chest slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled out the first photograph. It was of Sophia, radiant in her wedding dress, smiling at the camera. He remembered the day vividly, the joy they shared, the life they had planned together. But now, all that was left was a memory, a hollow echo of a life he could never have again. As Jack sat down on the floor, surrounded by photographs, letters, and keepsakes, he let himself grieve. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry the tears that had been locked away for so long. Later that evening, Lucy came into the study to check on him, noticing the open chest and the scattered memories. She hesitated at the door, unsure of how to approach him. But when Jack looked up at her, there was no judgment in his eyes only, a quiet plea for understanding. She walked over to him, kneeling beside him and gently placing her hand on his shoulder. "It's okay to feel this way, Jack," she said softly. "You don't have to carry this alone." For the first time in years, Jack allowed himself to lean on someone. He didn't try to hide his tears, didn't try to control the emotions that had been buried for so long. With Lucy beside him, he felt a sense of relief, as though he had finally taken the first step toward healing. The following days were a process of rediscovery. Jack slowly began to allow himself to heal, not by running from his past, but by embracing it. He spoke more openly with Lucy, sharing memories of Sophia and Noah, of the love he had once had, and of the pain that had followed their deaths. And with each conversation, he found that the weight of his grief grew a little lighter. Lucy continued to be his emotional anchor, offering her support and understanding without ever pushing him too hard. She was patient with him, letting him work through his pain at his own pace. One afternoon, as they sat together on the garden bench, Jack turned to her, a faint smile on his lips. "Thank you, Lucy," he said quietly, "for being here, for helping me through this." Lucy smiled back, her eyes soft with warmth. "You don't have to thank me, Jack. I'm just glad I could be here for you. We all need someone, sometimes." Jack looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than work and success. There was love, there was healing, and perhaps, for the first time in a long time, there was hope. As the days turned into weeks, Jack found himself slowly rebuilding his life, piece by piece. He had started opening up to Lucy in ways he hadn't even realized were possible. Every conversation, every shared moment, seemed to pull him out of the darkness of his past and bring him closer to something real, something more than just work, more than just success. But life, as always, had a way of throwing challenges his way when he least expected it. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Jack was sitting in his office, reviewing quarterly reports when the call came in. It was from his assistant, Karen. "Mr. Thornton, I'm afraid there's something you need to hear." "I've just received an urgent report from our legal department," she said, her voice tight. "There's been a leak of sensitive information from within the company. It's bad, and it's already causing some serious damage to our stock price." Jack's stomach dropped. He had worked tirelessly to build this company, to ensure it remained strong and untouchable. And now, someone was trying to tear it down from the inside. "Who's behind it?" Jack demanded, already rising from his chair and heading toward the door. His voice was cold, his mind already working through the steps to contain the damage. "We're still investigating, but it looks like it's coming from someone within the company. We're narrowing it down." Jack hung up, his mind racing. He immediately called a meeting with his top executives, all the while wondering who could have betrayed him. It didn't make sense. He trusted everyone in his inner circle as he walked into the conference room. He saw his team already gathered, their faces tense. "Let's get to the bottom of this," Jack said firmly, his voice betraying none of the anxiety he was feeling inside. "I want to know who's responsible for this and why." Hours passed, and the investigation was far from conclusive. Jack's team discovered that the leak had come from an employee in a high-level position, someone trusted by Jack and the board of directors. The name that surfaced was none other than Ralph, one of Jack's oldest business partners. Jack felt like the floor had been ripped out from under him. Ralph had been his right-hand man for years, a friend who had been with him from the very beginning. They had built their empire together, and now Ralph was the one who had betrayed him. As Jack processed the information, a heavy weight settled in his chest. He felt the familiar sting of betrayal, the same pain he had felt when he lost his family. But this time, the anger was sharper, more personal. Ralph had crossed a line. That evening, Jack found himself standing on the balcony of his penthouse, staring out at the city that had once seemed so full of promise. The lights below flickered like 1,000 stars, but none of them seemed to shine for him anymore. The cold wind whipped around him, but it did nothing to cool the fire building inside. "Mr. Thornton." Lucy's voice cut through the silence, and Jack turned to see her standing in the doorway, holding a glass of whiskey in her hand. She had been with him through the highs and lows, and tonight she could tell something was wrong. She didn't need to ask. "I know about Ralph," Jack said, his voice strained. Lucy stepped forward, her eyes full of concern. "I'm so sorry, Jack. I know how much trust you've put in him, but you're not alone in this. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself." Jack shook his head, feeling a mix of emotions he didn't know how to process. "I should have seen it coming. I've been so focused on everything else, I didn't notice the people closest to me starting to slip away." "It's my fault." "No," Lucy said firmly, walking up to him and placing her hand on his arm. "This isn't your fault. You trusted the people around you, and that's not a weakness. It's what makes you human. But this betrayal, this is on Ralph, not you." Jack turned to her, his face hardening with a new resolve. "I can't let him get away with this, Lucy. I won't." The next day, Jack took swift action. He had Ralph brought in for a meeting, his betrayal now undeniable. The conversation was brief, but filled with the sting of betrayal. Ralph tried to deny his involvement at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. Jack didn't waste time on words. He terminated Ralph immediately, revoking all access to the company and its assets, but the damage was done. The leak had already affected the company's reputation, and the stock prices were plummeting. Jack could feel the weight of it pressing on him. This wasn't just about money, this was about trust. And trust, once broken, was hard to repair. That evening, Jack was back in his office, staring at the chaos in front of him. The aftermath of the leak had left him physically and emotionally drained. The betrayal had shaken him to his core, and the weight of it felt unbearable. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," Jack called, without looking up. Lucy stepped into the room, her expression gentle but knowing. She walked over to his desk and placed a cup of tea in front of him. "I've been thinking," Lucy began softly, "about what happened with Ralph. I know it's hard, but you don't have to carry it all on your own. There are people who care about you, people who want to help." Jack looked up at her, his eyes tired but filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you. Lucy, you've been the one constant in all of this." Lucy sat down next to him, offering him a comforting smile. "You don't have to thank me, Jack. I'm here because I want to be. I care about you." Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle in. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to relax. He hadn't realized how much he had been holding on to until that moment. "Thank you," he said quietly, the sincerity in his voice clear. I think I need to take a step back and figure out what's next." Lucy nodded. "And you don't have to do it alone." The days following Ralph's betrayal were some of the most challenging Jack had ever faced. The leak had shaken his company to its core, and the damage to his reputation was widespread. Jack was determined to take control of the situation, but it wasn't going to be easy. He worked tirelessly, putting in long hours at the office, overseeing the cleanup of the mess Ralph had left behind. His mind was consumed by the task at hand. But through it all, there was something or other. Someone who kept him grounded. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Jack found himself in his office, going through reports. The noise of the phone ringing, the clicking of his computer mouse, and the shuffle of paperwork filled the room. But there was still an unsettling silence hanging in the air. He had made significant strides in restoring the company's operations. But the emotional toll of everything, the betrayal, the long hours, the weight of leadership had started to wear him down. He glanced at the chair across from his desk, where Lucy had often sat, offering him comfort and support during the most difficult moments. She had become more than just a source of assistance. She had become a quiet strength he couldn't imagine being without. She'd listened to him vent his frustrations, shared his worries, and, most importantly, never judged him. Lucy had been with him through the storm, always there when he needed her, offering a hand when he was sinking. And in return, Jack had started to notice the small ways she had changed his life. Her presence in the mansion, the warmth she brought with her, had made his house feel less like a cold, lonely fortress. In a way, she had been the anchor he needed to keep himself from drifting away into the abyss of his own grief and pain. One evening, after another long day at the office, Jack found himself pacing the floor of his study. He had just come from another round of meetings, all of which had been centered around the ongoing crisis. There was progress, but it was slow, and Jack knew that time was running out to rebuild his public image. The media was relentless, and the pressure from investors was mounting. He walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling city below, the lights twinkling like stars. But tonight, the view did little to soothe him. His mind was racing with questions, doubts, and frustrations. As much as he tried to focus on the business, his thoughts always returned to Lucy. Her kind eyes, her quiet strength. It was as if she had come into his life at exactly the moment he needed someone the most. Jack sighed and turned around. He needed to talk to her. He realized that now. He couldn't keep going like this, pretending everything was fine. He didn't want to. He wanted to share the weight of it all with her, to allow himself to be vulnerable for the first time in a long while. Without thinking, he picked up his phone and texted her. "Lucy, could you meet me in the study? I need to talk to you." A few minutes later, Lucy knocked softly at the door, and Jack motioned for her to come in. She entered the room with her usual calm demeanor, her eyes immediately assessing him. Jack could see the concern in her gaze, even though she said nothing. "Lucy," Jack began, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been thinking about everything. About the company, about the situation, but mostly about us." Lucy sat down across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "What's on your mind, Jack?" she asked gently, her voice a soothing balm to his worn-out soul. Jack hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put into words what he had been feeling. But Lucy's presence gave him the courage he needed. "I've been running from my past, from the pain, from everything," Jack admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I've used work to keep myself busy, but it hasn't worked. It's never worked. And through all of this, I've come to realize that you, your presence, your kindness, your unwavering support have been the only things that have kept me from completely losing myself." Lucy listened intently, her eyes soft but full of understanding. "I never thought I could trust anyone again after losing my family," Jack continued, his voice breaking slightly. "But you've made me see that trust doesn't have to come with fear. It can come with healing, with peace. I don't know what this means, or where it's going, but I just needed you to know how much you've helped me. You've changed my life." Lucy's expression softened, and for a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift from Jack's shoulders. Her warmth, her presence, it all felt so natural, so right. "Jack," she said quietly, her voice full of tenderness, "you don't have to thank me. You've done the hard work. I'm just here to help you see it, to help you see what you've been capable of all along." The next few weeks were a turning point for Jack. With Lucy's support, he began to make real strides in both his personal and professional life. The media, though still critical, had started to take notice of the efforts Jack was making to right the wrongs caused by Ralph's betrayal. His stock prices began to recover, and investors started to show renewed confidence in his leadership. But it wasn't just the business that was improving. Jack found himself feeling lighter, more at peace with his past. He had finally started to let go of the guilt and grief that had weighed him down for so long. It wasn't easy, but with Lucy by his side, he felt stronger than he ever had before. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and phone calls, Jack found himself standing in the garden, looking out at the view of the city. Lucy joined him, walking quietly to his side. "Feeling better?" she asked softly, standing beside him. Jack nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yes, a lot better, actually." "Good," Lucy said, her voice full of warmth. "You're moving forward. You're healing." Jack looked at her, his heart full of gratitude. He had never imagined that someone like her, a woman who had come into his life as a simple maid, would end up being the catalyst for his transformation. But here she was, helping him in ways he never thought possible. "Thank you, Lucy," he said, his voice sincere. "I don't know where I'd be without you." Lucy smiled, her eyes bright with affection. "You'd be fine, Jack. You've always been fine. You just needed to remember who you really are." Jack turned to her, his gaze intense. "Maybe, but I know this now. I couldn't have done it without you. I owe you more than you'll ever know." As the weeks went on, Jack felt like a different man. His company was recovering, slowly but surely. Investors were beginning to come around, and the media, though still skeptical, had started to report more favorably on his efforts to rebuild both his company and his personal life. The sting of betrayal from Ralph had subsided, replaced by a growing sense of control and purpose. But as things improved professionally, Jack found that there was still something missing, a void that couldn't be filled with business success alone. One evening, as Jack sat in his study, reviewing the latest figures and reports, he found his thoughts drifting again. This time, they didn't wander to the company or the daily stresses of his life. They wandered to Lucy. Her presence had become a constant in his world. She was no longer just the maid who came in every morning to clean and prepare meals. She was the one who had listened to him, who had given him space to grieve, to heal, and to move forward. She had brought warmth into his cold, empty house, and Jack had come to realize that without her, everything felt hollow. He could no longer deny the feelings he had for her. The connection between them had deepened, and Jack knew he couldn't keep pretending that their relationship was only professional. He had grown to care for her deeply more than he had cared for anyone in years. But he was afraid to take the next step. That evening, Jack had asked Lucy to meet him in the study. His mind was racing with thoughts of what he needed to say to her. His heart pounded as he waited for her to arrive. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," Jack called, trying to steady his nerves. Lucy walked in, her eyes bright and full of curiosity. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Thornton." Jack stood up from his desk and gestured for her to sit. His hands were shaking slightly, and for a moment, he didn't know where to start. "Lucy," Jack began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been thinking about Usa, about everything we've been through, and I can't ignore how I feel anymore. I know this isn't easy, and I don't expect you to feel the same way. But I have to be honest with you." Lucy's brow furrowed slightly, sensing the seriousness in his tone. She sat quietly, waiting for him to continue. Jack took a deep breath and finally let the words out, his voice raw with vulnerability. "I care about you, Lucy, more than I should, more than I ever thought possible. You've been there for me in ways no one else has, and I can't keep pretending like I don't feel anything. I don't know what this is, what we are, but I need you to know that I've fallen for you." The silence in the room felt like it stretched on forever. Jack's heart hammered in his chest, every word he had just spoken hanging in the air. He braced himself for her response, unsure of what to expect. Lucy was quiet for a long moment, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that Jack hadn't anticipated. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice soft but full of emotion. "Jack," she began, her tone gentle yet firm, "I never expected to hear that from you. I've been trying to understand what this is between us two. I've tried to keep my distance, to focus on my job, but you've been there for me just as much as I've been there for you, and I don't want to hide from it anymore." She paused, her hands clasped together in her lap as she searched his face. "I care about you, Jack. I've cared about you for a long time, but I didn't want to admit it, not when you've been through so much. I didn't want to risk complicating things. Jack let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. The weight that had been pressing down on him for weeks seemed to lift just a little bit, and the fear in his chest started to ease. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this vulnerable, but at the same time, it felt freeing. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't trying to control everything. He wasn't hiding behind walls. "I'm not asking for anything more than the chance to see where this can go," Jack said softly, his voice full of sincerity. "I don't expect it to be easy, and I know there are risks. But I can't keep pretending that I'm fine when I'm not. You've made me feel things I didn't think I could feel again." Lucy reached out, placing her hand gently over his. The touch was warm, reassuring, and it sent a wave of calm over Jack. "I'm not asking for perfection, Jack," Lucy said, her voice quieter now. "I'm not expecting everything to be easy. But what I do know is that I don't want to keep holding back either. I want to give this a chance, to see where it leads us." Jack smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. He hadn't realized just how badly he needed this, how much he had longed for this kind of connection. "You mean that?" Jack asked, his voice low but full of hope. Lucy nodded, her smile tender. "I do." The following weeks were a whirlwind of new beginnings for Jack and Lucy. They spent more time together, both inside and outside of work. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Jack began to confide in Lucy about things he had never spoken of before, his fears, his dreams, and his deepest regrets. And Lucy, in turn, shared more about her own life, her childhood, and the struggles she had faced to get where she was. But with every passing day, Jack found himself falling more deeply in love with her, not just because of the way she had helped him heal, but because of the person she was. She was kind, intelligent, and strong. She had a quiet strength that Jack admired, and she made him want to be better. One evening, after a long day of work, Jack took Lucy to their favorite quiet spot by the garden. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the flowers and trees. Jack had made a reservation at a local restaurant, but tonight, he just wanted to be with her. No distractions, no business. Just the two of them. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from golden to deep blue. "You know, I never thought I'd be here," Jack said, his voice thoughtful. "I never thought I'd be this happy again. But here I am, with you." Lucy smiled softly, her hand brushing against his. "I'm glad you're here, Jack. I never thought I'd be the one to help you heal. But I'm honored that I get to be a part of your life." As the night wore on, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. He had come so far personally, professionally, and it was all because of Lucy. She had been the anchor he didn't know he needed. The person who had helped him rediscover what truly mattered in life. For the first time in a long time, Jack wasn't looking over his shoulder at the past. He was looking forward to a future filled with hope, love, and the possibility of a new beginning. The weeks that followed Jack and Lucy's confession were filled with a sense of quiet anticipation, though the beginning of their relationship was grounded in uncertainty. The bond they were building felt solid, steady, and true. For Jack, it was a new chapter, one he hadn't expected, but one he was beginning to embrace fully. Lucy had become his confidant, his strength and his support, but beyond that, she had become someone he genuinely cared for, someone he could see a future with. And as the days passed, Jack found himself opening up more and more, revealing parts of himself that had long been hidden, even from himself. One Sunday afternoon, Jack invited Lucy to join him for a walk in the city. It had been a while since they had spent time together outside of work, and Jack was eager to show her a side of the city he rarely allowed anyone to see, the quiet, peaceful corners that had always brought him solace as they walked through the streets. Lucy's laughter filled the air, and Jack couldn't help but smile. She had a way of making everything feel lighter, more colorful, even when everything around them seemed so busy and chaotic. It was as if her very presence brought life to everything. They passed by a small park, tucked away between two buildings, a place Jack had visited many times over the years. It was quiet, peaceful, and the perfect place to sit and think. "I used to come here a lot," Jack said, his voice softer than usual, "when I was still trying to figure things out. It's the only place in this city that feels ... com." Lucy glanced at him, a slight smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Why didn't you bring anyone here before?" Jack's eyes softened as he looked out over the park. "I guess I thought it was mine. My place to think, to be alone. But now, I don't mind sharing it." Lucy walked closer to him, her hand brushing his. "I'm glad you're sharing it with me." For a moment, Jack simply stood there, taking in the peace of the park. But then he turned to face Lucy, his expression serious, though his eyes were warm. "I want to build something real with you, Lucy," Jack said, his voice low but filled with sincerity. "I don't want to keep living in the past. You've shown me what it means to live in the moment, to be present. And I want that. I want to be with you. Not just in this house, not just in this city, but in my life, in the future." Lucy looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had known, deep down, that this was coming. She had always felt it. The connection they shared was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. But hearing him say the words out loud made her heart race, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, they could build something that was lasting. "I want that too." "Jack," she replied, her voice steady but full of affection. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to be there with you." They stood there for a while, hands entwined, as the sounds of the city seemed to fade away. In that moment, nothing else mattered. They had faced so much together already, the betrayal, the pain, the uncertainty, and now they were ready to face the future together. A few days later, as Jack continued to put the final pieces of his company back in place, he found himself feeling less burdened. The damage caused by Ralph's betrayal had been repaired, and the company was beginning to thrive once again. But more than the success, it was the personal growth that meant the most to Jack. He had learned to trust again. He had learned to open up, and now, with Lucy by his side, he felt ready to tackle whatever came next. But as he sat in his office, looking over some last-minute reports, a thought struck him, a thought that had been lingering in the back of his mind for some time now. The next morning, Jack called Lucy to his office. She arrived promptly, as she always did, with her usual calm demeanor. "Lucy, there's something I've been thinking about," Jack began, his voice hesitant. "I've been so focused on the business, on everything that's been happening. But there's one thing I haven't done yet." Lucy tilted her head, intrigued. "What's that?" Jack stood up and walked around the desk, his hands in his pockets. "I want to make this official. I want you to know that I'm serious about us, about this relationship, and I want you to be a part of it, not just in my life, but in my business too." Lucy blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" Jack smiled softly, his eyes warm with affection. "I want you to come on board. I want you to be part of the team. not just as my assistant, but as my partner, in business and in life. For a moment, Lucy was speechless. She hadn't expected this. She had always kept a professional distance, never wanting to blur the lines between their work and their personal relationship. But as she looked at Jack, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she realized that he wasn't asking her to simply join his company. He was asking her to be an equal, someone who could help him build something real, not just professionally, but personally as well. I don't know what to say, Lucy said, her voice full of emotion. This is a huge step, Jack. I'm honored, but I also don't want to take on something I'm not ready for. Jack took a step closer, his voice gentle. You've already been a part of this journey with me, Lucy. I know what you're capable of, and I trust you. This isn't just about business, it's about building something with you. Something we both care about. Lucy took a deep breath, considering his words. She had always been hesitant about mixing business and personal life, but she couldn't deny that she had come to care deeply for Jack, and she wanted to be a part of his future, whatever that might look like. I'm in, she said, her voice steady. I'll do it. We'll do it, together. Weeks later, Jack and Lucy found themselves more in sync than ever before. Their relationship had deepened, their professional partnership growing stronger with every decision they made together. Lucy became an invaluable part of the company, bringing fresh ideas and a level of creativity that Jack had always admired, but never had the chance to cultivate. That evening, as they sat together in the garden once again, Jack looked at Lucy with a sense of peace he hadn't known for years. His company was thriving, his heart was healing, and the future felt full of endless possibilities. Thank you, Jack said softly, his voice full of gratitude. For everything. For helping me rebuild my life. For being here, for being you. Lucy smiled, her hand gently resting in his. I couldn't have done it without you, Jack. You've always had the strength inside you. You just needed someone to help you see it. Jack leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. In that moment, he realized that everything he had gone through, every challenge, every loss, it had all led him here to this point. With Lucy by his side, he knew he was ready for whatever the future held. The weeks after Jack and Lucy made their professional and personal partnership official were filled with growth, both individually and as a couple. Their teamwork in the office became seamless, and the company began to flourish under their joint leadership. Jack had always been a driven, self-reliant man, but now he felt the weight of the world lifting off his shoulders. With Lucy by his side, he realized that success didn't have to be achieved alone. They took on new projects together, made key strategic decisions, and began to reshape the company's image. Jack often found himself thinking back to the day when everything had seemed so dark and hopeless. He had thought he could never trust anyone again, never open up, never love again. But Lucy had proven him wrong. Slowly but surely, she had shown him that the world wasn't as empty as he had once believed. It was a warm summer evening, and Jack found himself in the familiar comfort of the garden at his mansion. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the flowers and trees. For once, Jack wasn't thinking about the next meeting or the latest business deal. He was simply enjoying the moment, sitting next to Lucy, who was humming softly as she trimmed the flowers in the garden. I've been thinking, Jack said, turning to look at her. We've been through so much. The betrayal, the challenges, the way things seemed to spiral out of control. But now, I feel like everything's finally falling into place. I can't help but feel like this is a new chapter for us." Lucy looked up, meeting his gaze, and smiled softly. "I feel the same way. It's been a journey, hasn't it?" Jack nodded, his expression turning serious. "I never thought I'd be here. I never thought I'd feel this way again. But I do. I'm not just talking about the business or the success we've had. I'm talking about us. I never knew what it was like to truly trust someone until I met you, Lucy. And now, I don't want to imagine my life without you in it." Her heart skipped a beat at his words. She had always known that Jack was special to her, but hearing him say it so plainly made her chest swell with emotion. "I feel the same way, Jack," she said, her voice quiet but full of love. "We've both been through so much, but I've never felt more at home with anyone than I do with you. You've made me see life differently. You've made me believe in the possibility of a future together." Jack's gaze softened, and for a long moment they just looked at each other, taking in the quiet beauty of the evening. The world around them seemed to slow down, as if giving them a moment to breathe, to savor what they had built together. The next day, Jack and Lucy decided to take their next big step. They invited their closest friends and family to a small gathering at the mansion. Celebration not just for their professional successes, but for the personal journey they had taken together as they mingled with their guests. Jack found himself standing next to Lucy, watching the people around them. They had both come so far, and the future now felt full of promise. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Lucy asked softly, her hand resting on his arm. Jack smiled down at her, his heart full of gratitude. "All the time. It's hard to believe how much has changed in such a short amount of time. But I know this I couldn't have done it without you. I wouldn't have wanted to." She smiled back at him, her eyes shining with affection. "I think we make a great team." Jack chuckled. "I agree. A great team in business and in life." Later that evening, after the guests had left, Jack and Lucy found themselves sitting together on the balcony, looking out at the city below. The soft glow of the city lights reflected the warmth they felt in each other's presence. For the first time in years, Jack felt at peace. He wasn't constantly running from his past anymore. He had faced it, healed from it, and moved forward. And now, with Lucy by his side, he had a future to look forward to. "I love you, Lucy," Jack said, his voice soft and full of sincerity. "I can't imagine my life without you." Lucy turned to him, her heart swelling with emotion. "I love you too, Jack. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." They sat in silence for a while, just enjoying the stillness and each other's company. The weight of their pasts had been lifted, and now they were free to embrace whatever the future held. A year had passed since Jack and Lucy made their partnership official, both in business and in life. Their company had grown exponentially, and they had earned the respect of everyone in their industry. But it wasn't just the success that mattered, it was the life they had built. Together, they had learned to trust each other fully, support each other through thick and thin, and find happiness in the simple things. Jack had become a man who no longer relied solely on his wealth or his company for fulfillment. Lucy had shown him that there was so much more to life than just the numbers on a page. One evening, as they sat together in their living room, Jack turned to Lucy with a smile. "You know, I've been thinking. We've come so far, but I think it's time to take the next step." Lucy raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Jack smiled, his heart racing as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a sparkling diamond ring. "I think it's time we make this officially." Lucy's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. Jack ... double quotes. He took her hand, looking into her eyes with all the love he felt. "Lucy, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Lucy's eyes as she nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Jack. Yes, I will." Jack slipped the ring onto her finger, and in that moment, everything fell into place. They had been through so much together: loss, betrayal, heartache, but in the end, they had found each other. And now, they were ready to build their future together as they kissed. The future stretched before them, full of endless possibilities. They had learned that no matter how many obstacles life threw their way, they could face them together, and with each other, they had everything they needed.